What will be the epicenter of the next India-China war? Pakistan has increased its defense expenditure by 15% despite the fact that the people there are starving. When you add that to the defense budget and say we are spending 1.9% of our GDP on defense, I think it's an optical illusion. India is in a position to choke this juggler. This is the juggler on which almost 80% of China's oil from Saudi Arabia that goes through here. We cannot choose to fight only on one flank and say we will not fight on the other. We may not want to fight there, but how about the enemy? If we ignore the terrific naval advantages that we have, we would be very foolish indeed. You simply have to increase your GDP. Penny pinching and cost cutting can be extremely short-sighted, foolish and dangerous. What will be the epicenter of the next India-China war? Will it be on the high Himalayas or will it be in the high seas? It is not a rhetorical but a very seminal question with very major consequences in the economic sphere, in the military sphere, in the allocation of resources per se. Because depending on where you will have to do the main fighting, you will have to have your equipment and modernization plans. You will have to set the inter-se priorities between the resource allocation for the Army, the Navy, the Air Force. So it is not a theoretical question. It is a very seminal question which then sets the stage for a whole lot of other decisions of consequence. So for that we first need a geography masterclass, military geography masterclass. Is India a continental power or is it a maritime power? Russia is a continental power, Germany was a continental power, so was China a continental power, America is a maritime power, United Kingdom is a maritime power, and this is the typology that stems from your geography, your military geography. In the case of India, I am afraid it is a rare case. It is both a continental power and it is a maritime power. It is a continental power because it has massive land borders with China along the Himalayas. The mountains eat up troops. You require massive manpower to just man the Himalayan borders. Previously, it was thought historically that the Himalayas were a natural rampart that defended India from any invasion from the north. Now, you have to defend the Himalayas themselves. Then you have Pakistan onto your western side, and we have a whole plethora of terrain segments from the north to the south, from the mountains of the north to the burning desert sands of the Thar. In between you have riverine terrain, you have plains terrain, semi-desert terrain, desert terrain, a plethora of terrain segments that we have from the north to the south on the western front. It is again a massive land border. Then you have the borders with Bangladesh, with Myanmar. So India is a continental land power with major challenges on its land borders, which just cannot be ignored or wished away. When China attacked Tibet in 1950, there was a paradigm shift in our national security architecture. And we have paid a price for not contesting China's advance into Tibet. The simple fact is in 1962 we were attacked and taught a bitter lesson. We were forced to expand and modernize our armed forces at a very rapid blistering pace from 1963 onwards. 10 more mountain divisions had to be added along with their concomitant backups of artillery and logistical backup, etc. Major paradigm shift that took place. Now the situation is that we have our LAC, line of actual control with China, in Ladakh has been LOCized. It has been turned into a virtual line of control as it was with Pakistan, where every inch of territory is contested, every inch of land has to be fought over, has to be guarded, has to be secured, because you take your eyes off for a minute and the status quo will be altered, and the public outcry that follows is amazing. So that is what we saw. Again, we have seen a series of Chinese salami slice encroachments which have necessitated a very, very active defense on the borders. In 2022, when China staged the Ladakh intrusions, we had to react in a massive hurry. We mirror imaged the Chinese deployments. We rushed in 50,000 troops to Ladakh. We rushed in our first strike corps, which was Pakistan facing, Pakistan centric, to the Himalayan border, and we've seen a massive build-up of infrastructure, a very costly build-up of infrastructure in the mountains, but that was long overdue. Somewhere in the 1970s, we have that inevitable tussle, like in all democracies, between the three wings of the armed forces, the three services, for a greater allocation of resources. A lot of naval strategists were pointing out that India has a unique geostrategic location in the Indian Ocean region. The Indian peninsula juts out like an unsinkable aircraft carrier, and it dominates the entire sea lanes of communications, the SLOCs, from the Suez, the Gulf of Aden, to the Straits of Malacca. From the Gulf of Aden to the Straits of Malacca, India dominates all the sea lanes. Just south of 100 kilometers plus south of the Andaman Islands passes the 10-degree channel, through which all the shipping traffic east to west has to funnel through and go to the Straits of Malacca. India is in a position to choke this juggler. This is the juggler on which almost 80% of China's oil from Saudi Arabia that goes through here. 80% of its oil, most of it which comes from Saudi Arabia. Of course, there has been the diversion towards Russia, and overland pipelines are not in place as yet. So most of it is still coming via the sea. We sit astride the Chinese oil supply lines. China is a great trading power. It is a massive export engine. Chinese economy has gone places because of the massive exports that it is doing. These exports go to the south of India's peninsular jut. And when push comes to shove, India can sever these economic lifelines and cause serious damage to China. Therefore, a number of well-meaning Indian naval strategists, and primary amongst them was a person whom I respect the most as one of the most fertile military minds in India, Rear Admiral Raja Menon. He suggested that instead of taking China on in the Himalayas and wasting an amount of resources there, India could do a much more effective job of bringing China to grief by simply severing its sea lines of communication which pass south of India. India dominates those lines of communication. India can choke the Straits of Malacca, the choke points of Malacca, the Straits of Aden, the Suez Canal, India's naval influence. We can project power in this arc and absolutely throttle China economically. So comes the question, pursuant to this navalization of our thinking, which is required, because like I said, we are both a continental and a maritime power. It cannot be an either or equation. We cannot choose to fight only on one flank and say we will not fight on the other. We may not want to fight there, but how about the enemy? You cannot legislate for the enemy. So I'm afraid it can't be an either or equation. We'll have to fight on both fronts, both flanks, continental as well as maritime. Not for a minute can we take our eyes off the Himalayan theatre. And if we ignore the terrific naval advantages that we have by virtue of sitting astride China's sea lanes of communication, we would be very foolish indeed. We would be throwing away a great advantage that military geography confers on India in its battle, in its adversarial relationship with China. We will have to be prepared for fighting on both the sea flank as well as on high Himalayan borders as well as the high seas. We are in high places. It's going to be costly, but I'm afraid there is no way out. You simply have to increase your GDP. Penny pinching and cost cutting can be extremely short-sighted, foolish and dangerous. We cannot get into a defense straitjacket as we had during our history. All three battles of Panipat, which were decisive for who rules India, were fought in Panipat, 150 kilometers from New Delhi or then Old Delhi. And we lost each. You let the enemy come up, cede all initiative, you will end up with a disaster. We cannot again cede the initiative to our adversaries, whether on land, whether on the seas. We will have to be proactive in the defense of India, both on the land borders. It is good to defend every inch, but there is a saying, he who holds everything holds nothing. We will have to be able to hit back. Apart from the shield, we will also need the sword of retribution, what Clausewitz called the sword of retribution. We will have to raise the strike corps, mountain strike corps. We've raised the first strike corps, we have converted from the plains to the mountains. The 17th strike corps is already ready in existence, and possibly we'll have to create the rudiments of a third strike corps, because it is needed. Our accountants may fret and fume and say the army is costing too much. You can't have a death wish. You will have to increase the percentage of GDP that you spend on defense. Right now, on paper, we are 1.9%. But that includes 1.6 lakh pay bill for the armed forces, including 30,000 defense civilians. It includes the pension for the armed forces, again including 30,000 civilians, and that is 1,11,000 crores. Now, they very neatly add that. Most countries don't include that in your defense budget. But when you add that to the defense budget and say we are spending 1.9% of our GDP on defense, I think it's an optical illusion. We are only fooling ourselves. Our actual defense expenditure is well below 1.5% of the GDP. Every single European nation after the Russia-Ukraine war has gone up to 2% of the GDP. China is also at 2% of the GDP plus. Russia is at 8% because it is fighting the war. Pakistan has increased its defense expenditure by 15% despite the fact that the people there are starving. So we will have to increase the allocation of our defense budget. I'm afraid the simple answer is high seas or the high Himalayas is not an either or equation. You will have to fight in both these theatres come the next conflict with China. And if we are prepared for both, we will come out on tops. Thank you. Please like and subscribe the Chanakya Dialogues and the On Target program.